Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thanks so much for joining me. And I am happy to come to you today with a topic that you're not thinking about, but is really important. And I love talking to James Czerniawski because he is someone that I've had on pretty frequently, and he's in the weeds on tech policy and legislation that's moving through Congress around technology. And this stuff is incredibly important for our future and how, think about the next 2 to 3 years when you have, you know, artificial generative intelligence, which is a step above current AI, where it's going to be smarter than us, right? And that gets a lot of the press, and that's kind of what James is here to talk about. Is there are a lot of things that Congress needs to do, like protecting broadband, where we need to win that race against other countries, and we need smart policy. And so instead of complaining about government policy like we normally do, we're going to talk about something that Congress is doing well and needs to pass. So stay tuned here for my conversation with Senior Tech and Innovation Policy Analyst for Americans at Prosperities, James Czerniawski. James, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You look fantastic. Last time we talked, you just rapidly lost a lot of weight. And I think we talked, you were like overseas. And look at you. You're doing it. You look great, testifying in all kinds of cool places. It's really great to keep touch with you over the years and see all the progress you've made.
Yeah, it's been a wild year and change since we last got to go and talk. So, certainly happy to go and keep on the good progress as we're getting into 2025 here.
Well, whenever we talk to James, that means something in Congress is messed up with technology. This time, though, we've got a little bright shoot here. So he just wrote an article in the American Thinker called Spurring Innovation in Wireless Tech. And I found it to be a pretty interesting concept because I don't ever think about when this phone just connects to the internet, right? And I have all these camera things that just connect to the internet, and it's all 5G. It's all connected on the broadband. And that, James, seems like it's getting more and more important. And that is the crux of your article. Let's talk about that. Why is 5G and wireless connectivity becoming so important in our day and age?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. And really, what it comes down to is just that our world is getting increasingly digital. All of our technologies are trying to communicate with each other. And that means that we need spectrum to do that, right? And spectrum is that key piece of technology that allows for our devices to go and connect with one another, whether that's our radio that's playing in our car that utilizes spectrum, or our, Wi-Fi services, or our, cellular services that's all leveraging some sort of spectrum. And really, if we're in the middle of this global race of technology right now, I know everybody's been thinking about artificial intelligence, and rightfully so. I mean, that is an industrial revolution level technology right there, in terms of its potential impact on the world. But you do need to go and support other technologies that are going to be, tangential to that. And Spectrum is one of those things that's going to help that happen. So don't want to go and forget about that in this conversation. And that's why it's kind of nice to see Congress also not forgetting about Spectrum, even though there is the allure of the shiny object that is AI in the room.
Yeah, so you are writing about in this article the Spectrum Pipeline Act of 2025. What is it and why does it matter?
Yeah, so basically, the Spectrum Pipeline Act is a piece of legislation that seeks to do a couple of different things that I think are important. First and foremost, it would go and restore the Spectrum Auction Authority of the Federal Communications Commission. This authority had lapsed during the Biden administration, and this was like a key way that the commission would go and actually raise money because it could auction off available spectrum and actually bring money into the coffers of the United States. But that's been lapsed for the last couple of years now. This particular legislation or variant of it was in the last Congress as well, but it just didn't get through the finish line because, as you know, Congress does not get the opportunity to do many things. It feels like, and this one just ultimately didn't go and make it through the punch there. But that's the one of the most important things that it's doing. Secondly, it does go and open up a patch of spectrum for unlicensed use cases as opposed to licensed. I think that that's just meant to try to, keep options open in terms of how that technology might go and develop. That wants to leverage that spectrum. And lastly, it basically goes and tasks the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the NTIA, to come up with basically an identification of mid-band spectrum for potential reallocation in a timely fashion, right? And I think that that's the key thing that's important. Like we just got out of a Biden administration where they did this $42 billion BEAD program, and fast forward 3 years later, and nobody got connected through it, right? So I think that was very much on the mind of lawmakers as they were kind of crafting this through. So they want to go and get that process of identifying mid-band spectrum done in a more timely fashion, so that way we can, hopefully open that up for auctioning and other kinds of things as we're looking to develop this technology here.
All right, so let's break these two apart and why they're important. So let's start with the unlicensed spectrum since we just talked about that. Um, why is that important for innovation and startups?
When it comes to unlicensed spectrum, I think that that just basically allows for startups and smaller tech firms to go and compete and thrive on the marketplace. That's why it's kind of important. When you're basically empowering these innovators to go and thrive, that makes the marketplace more dynamic and competitive as a result of the process, right? And unlicensed, kind of similar to like when we're thinking in the AI context of like of the open source community, if you will. If we're keeping it open for unlicensed use cases, that allows for innovations on the margin that are actually, I think, good for improving, the net experience on the end case for consumers in ways that perhaps like your main stage use cases underneath the license spectrum, you might not necessarily capture them as well, right? So I think that that's like the nice little distinction there that you might want to go and see.
All right, so let me break it down for people who don't. I'm barely hanging in with you, right? I work in radio, so I think that's kind of why I understand, right? So you buy a radio, and on the radio you get the dials, and 94.7 is a licensed band that iHeartMedia owns, essentially the license to broadcast on that frequency,
Hmm.
right? So when we're talking about 5G and the spectrum and the unlicensed spectrum that you're talking about, 125 megahertz, can you explain that to me like I'm trying to explain it to an 8-year-old? The listeners want to know. It's not me. I, of course, understand everything you're saying, but explain it to me like I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, again, I think that the purpose of what you're trying to do here, like when you're doing the licensed use case, it's just that you're having exclusivity over what's going on within that particular band in your zone of area of coverage, if you will, right? If it's unlicensed, it just means that you're not going to try to, close out the entry of other people to go and leverage this technology. And there might be, you know, more flexibility in terms of like what technologies will interact with that because you're not having like the hard barrier that kind of exists that gets created through a licensed spectrum regime, if you will, right? So that's really what we're talking about here, and why this matters is like the megahertz is just the amount of spectrum that we're going and allocating here, but really what matters here is that this is all mid band spectrum overall that we're talking about. And why that's important is that when we're looking at 5G, mid band spectrum gives you the nice blend of strength and range. So that way you're not like, losing it because it hit like a building wall or whatever, right? For example. So it gives you that nice blend that I think is actually ideal for what we need when we're trying to go and develop this technology. And the reason why that matters is that, again, when we look back to 4G, the previous generation of this technology, the United States was first to getting that deployed out there, right? And that represented billions of dollars and economic activity for the United States as a result of that. And right now, like most things, unsurprisingly, it's a race between the United States and China. And if we're able to go and get this kind of stuff up going and let people leverage it faster, I think that we'll be able to go and continue our leadership in this kind of technology relative to the rest of our adversarial counterparts that are out there in the world stage.
So does the technology already exist? It just needs the regulatory authority to manage it? Or are we, China develops it and then we go, oh, okay, let's see, we can move this over here. Kind of like with DeepSeek and ChatGPT. It's like, oh, DeepSeek did this thing that we hadn't thought about versus, hey, we already know this exists. We just need you to get out of the way, government.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, right? Because there's what we know, and then there's the known unknown, if you will, right? And so I think that there's a lot of technologies that stand to gain. Internet of Things devices are certainly reliant on having that kind of tight communication, and 5G certainly offers them the opportunity to do that in a way that's better than the 4G telecommunication infrastructure. So that's a net positive thing with existing technology. But then, in general, as you open up and integrate the next generation of technology into the ecosystem, more broadly speaking, that might go and unlock further potential for other technologies that we have yet to really see get, exposed to the ecosystem more broadly speaking, right? So really what it comes down to is just that you want to, it's a blend of things really. Like there's a lot of existing technology that's leveraging 5G. We've had that for years, but there's also other emerging things that could theoretically come out as well as it becomes more widely used.
Okay, so let's hop back to the other part of this act, which is the auction authority that the FCC has. And you said that lapsed in 2023, but this is an important component, right? So it's not purely free market because obviously we're talking about the government regulating and controlling something. Again, going back to my radio days, that you've got to have an FCC controlling the bands of spectrum because then you're going to end up with three people trying to compete for 94.7, 95.5. And so we do need some sort of referee. I don't know what you think about that argument in all this. It doesn't seem crazy as an argument to me, but then in terms of who gets what and how, that's where the auction authority comes in, correct? Do I understand both of those things correctly?
Yeah, yeah. I think at the end of the day, what you're talking about there is the FCC needs that auction authority because spectrum is a scarce resource, and you don't want to go and have conflict over people, trying to go and have the free for all on what is a scarce resource. So the FCC has historically been able to, as the regulator, basically serve as that referee role to say, you own this block, you can go and operate with this particular swath, nobody else can go and mess with it. That's the nice thing about having like an exclusive license, right? Now, from an economic standpoint, again, because you can go and attach a monetary value to it, that's an added benefit to the United States as well, because you're raising billions of dollars that goes into the treasury as a result of the auction program, right? So that's why it's doubly important. So one, you have a necessary ref there to make sure that people are playing nice with what is a rare resource out there in spectrum. But then by extension, it does have some positive in an otherwise, government that loves to spend money and have any excuse to go and light it on fire. Like this is one of the few things where it's actually trying to bring money back in and do some offsets for the cost that the agency is otherwise incurring, right? So I don't want to go and run up the tab even more with when our debt is such a pressing issue.
Yeah. Well, we've been liberated, so we've at least got 300 billion more coming in. Anyways, I'm very salty about that today, James. But let's continue down. Like, I think if you saw this episode, you go, all right, the Spectrum Act. What do I really like? How does this really impact your average person who's just kind of taking their kids to school, taking them to ball, driving to work and every day? Like, how does the need for innovation here impact our future and our daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. And what I would say is that it's not in the way, like, it's not the transformational thing, right? It's not like when you got the AI moment and you saw ChatGPT get unveiled and like everybody's like, whoa, right? Like, this is a lot more in the unseen department when we're thinking through it from an economic lens. But that being said, it's the little things that might go and improve because now your devices can go and communicate with each other better. That might mean you might have devices that can go and help you a little bit more effectively and efficiently than previously possible, right? So your smart home technologies will be able to know how to better set and manage your thermostat, or your smart fridge helping tell you like if you need to go and deal with your groceries or something, right? Like it's little things on the margin that might just go and help you. But it's really going to unleash, I think, just a lot of other use cases that might just go and improve your overarching experience, right? So really it's about helping the other technologies that might help you in other ways. That's why this is so important, right? And really that's the big thing here is that spectrum. I know it's not sexy, but it is the undergirding infrastructure that is helping power many of the technologies that do make our lives better.
So if China gets there first, how does that look in 5 years, 10 years? That daily experience?
Yeah, I think that it doesn't necessarily change on the margin per se. I just think that it creates what some would argue is the national security risk, because they might go and be gobbling up a bunch of information on the user as a result of having that technology inside our infrastructure. Or there were some reports of China having malware installed within some of the technology that was embedded in the United States infrastructure program, which is why you saw Congress then proceed to allocate billions of dollars towards the program of rip and replace, right? To go and take out a bunch of Huawei technology that was inside the United States communication infrastructure, right? So there's a little bit of a national security argument that comes into why you don't want China going and leading in this instance, is that it does create a cyber threat, a privacy consideration. And again, too, by extension, I just think like we always want to be careful because we know that China has a particular view for how they look at technology that tends to be a little bit more censorious. And the more grip they have over your tech infrastructure in general, the more likely it is that they can export those values to your tech infrastructure, right? So if China was leading in AI, right, like we already know they're going to go and censor a bunch of stuff from the LLM that's going to be critical of the PRC, right? So you don't want to go and have them getting into your critical telecommunication infrastructure like that.
Okay, so what's the future of the act? I know is it bipartisan? Some Republicans have sponsored it. Where do you think this ends up going? It didn't work out last year, but does it have a
Yeah.
future?
That's a fair question, then that remains to be seen. It's still very early in the process. I know that it's been introduced in the House, but when it comes to the Senate, I don't think it has just yet, but I know that there's definitely a lot of appetite to get that done in the Senate. Last time around, it was Senators Thune, Cruz, Marsha Blackburn that were leading it in the Senate side. This time it started over in the House. So I know that there's definitely bicameral interest. Right now, I think they're partisan bills, but I do think that there is an argument to be made that this can be a bipartisan issue. This isn't the controversial, deeply partisan type of issue that we might see in other areas of tech policy that'll get Republicans and Democrats, pitted against each other. I think that there's definitely an opportunity for this to be a bipartisan kind of thing. So, but that remains to be seen. It's pretty early in the process, and it's something that we'll have to continue to monitor as this year unfolds.
All right, James, where can people follow if they want to learn more?
Yeah, people can always go and follow me on the trusty old Twitter that is now X. I still will call it Twitter no matter what, but that's at JamesCZ19. Or you can go and check out my personal website or my work at americansforprosperity.org.
All right, great. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, James. Well, thank you very much for your time.